Robinson, or the play typer guy, as my son calls me. My guest today is Democratic candidate Nolan Bylenga, who's running for Congress from Oregon's 3rd Congressional District, which is my own. But I'll remain impartial. And I'm very delighted to chat with you, Nolan, and hear some more about your campaign. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. My campaign was started mainly as a bunch of college students. That's how we got started. I'm currently pursuing my master's degree in political science. I got my bachelor's a couple years ago in 2020. And after I got my bachelor's, I ended up running a campaign for state representative. And it was in Pendelton, Oregon, is where I lived at the time. We were going for House District 58, and that is a very, very right-wing area. So it was not an election, I'd say, where we had the best of chances, right? But we wanted to get in there and make some noise and see what we could do to spark the Democratic Party in the area and things like that. And but recently, we had a bunch of students that came together after Earl Blumenauer decided to announce his retirement. And they all hopped on board with helping me run a campaign, including my campaign manager, who he's been a campaign manager for people who've been in the state legislature before, so he really knows what he's doing. And lots of other people that got a lot of experience, and it's been great.
I'm sure this primary is pretty heated and tough for you in the sense that a lot of people would, now that Blumenauer has resigned or retired rather, are hopping into it. So how do you feel about the competition, or are you just focused on your own on your own race, or are you kind of thinking about how to distinguish yourself from some of the other folks who are going to be running?
Well, in terms of the competition, it is big competition that we're going against. People that are former people that are in the state legislature right now, someone who's the treasurer of the Democratic Party, someone who's got a family member that's actively in Congress. And so it is a difficult race. They've got a lot of money, very wealthy individuals. But they do have things here and there where they haven't done the greatest of jobs, right? There's a lot of things we agree on, but they have, messed with finances and certain things and areas. I don't want to get into all of it by any means and throw shade at people, but I think that there is a chance for somebody that's younger and somebody that has, brought energy and organizing. I used to do a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff in 2020, and we put on, during that last campaign, we had a big march in Pendelton where we brought, hundreds of people down to Pendelton, Oregon, the land of the cowboys. And I love Pendelton. There's no shade on Pendelton, but it's hard to do that in a town like that. And we managed to bring hundreds of people down to Pendelton and have an actual march in the streets, and we went up against we went up against militias. We went up against people that had Confederate flags and all kinds of stuff. And there's a moment when we were doing that, you kind of feel like you're back in the day with John Lewis or something. You're like, I have never seen so many Confederate flags in my entire life, right? It was appalling to me. But
in a state, obviously, that was not a Confederate state, did not fight in the Civil War, so it tends to, in that capacity, so seems to be quite a statement of perhaps overt white supremacy to be flying a Confederate flag in Oregon in the 21st century. So that probably was very tough to confront.
Oh yeah, no, it was more than I expected, I'll be honest, because we wanted to organize events, and because in that area, how do I put this, right? In Portland, there was a lot of there are a lot of more, violent and angry folks, especially around nighttime, right? And so we had this motive of being like, okay, we're going to put this out as peaceful protest. We're going to try to follow like strictly in the footsteps of like Martin Luther King. and have try to be as disciplined as possible with our folks that were there to serve the purpose, because we were in an area where if we did things wrong, like, it would not help the cause at all, in that area. And we had to work with police, and the police actually did a great job. I'm not going to lie, in that community. They came out, the chief of police came out and made a statement in support of us, so I think they were not everybody, obviously, have issues with certain folks, but they were like, yeah, like, there's issues within the institution, and there's things that need to be dealt with. And so they helped us make a safety plan. Uh, they actually gave us somewhat of a police escort during it too. And in that march, it was wild, because they had a whole bunch of Back to Blue counter protesters and folks like that who rushed our group when our group started marching, and they were pushing and shoving the people in the back. So the police actually ended up making a barricade wall, and behind our protests, to keep these counter protesters from trying to get to our marchers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they started pushing and shoving the police. Like, they had Back to Blue flags and all this stuff, and now they're going and attacking the police. So the chief of police, with the local newspaper, he ended up saying, essentially, I'm paraphrasing it, this isn't quoting right off what it says, but paraphrasing, he was saying, like, why are these people that say they're supporting us now going after us, right? And it worked out in our favor, where it was like that classic non-violent protest, where it started changing the community opinion around Black Lives Matter a little bit. People saw how we'd been treated, and how, we marched with dignity and respect, and we did everything as perfect as we could, but we still had these people that were just going at us like nobody's business. And it was an interesting experience.
Yeah. So because there is sort of a right-wing spin that these marches were both violent and overtly anti-police, perhaps unreasonably anti-police, and that wasn't the case for most of them. They were tended to be peaceful, as Yurik said, and you allude to the late John Lewis, and so um, I'm always reticent to call the civil rights movement nonviolent, because these folks faced a lot of violence, but they themselves were peaceful in the face of violence, similar to what you just described. Um, for people listening who might be unfamiliar with you, who are voters in Portland or just outside of Oregon itself, could you just tell us a little bit about your background? Because you're, if I recall correctly, a native of Michigan, you were born in Lansing. Is that true? And then what brought you out to Oregon?
So I was born in Lansing, Michigan. Like, my parents were up there when I was just a baby. They moved to the West Coast within months of me being born.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been in Pendelton by the time I was in first or second grade. And I've been there essentially in Oregon ever since, barring traveling for college and certain things here and there. But
Not that you would remember, but that's significant. I would think that's significant culture shock, right? Like, from Lansing, Michigan to Pendleton, Oregon. But for your experience, you just grew up there. That's kind of what you know, right? Like, so what was that like growing up in Pendleton?
Growing up in Pendleton, like, it's tough for me, because I personally, like, I love Pendleton. I love the people that are there. It's very conservative. A lot of people that disagree with a lot of the things that I believe in. But I would say the overwhelming majority of folks are not, like, unreasonable or bad folks. I think it's more so you've got this thing where they're watching news that's giving them all this falsified information, and so they see the world in a very different way than I see the world. And the goal with our last campaign, when I was in that area, was more bringing folks together and trying to get them to see kind of our perspective without pushing them away.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up be a good thing. But Pendleton, I ran track and field in high school. I ended up running track and field in college. I'm a big sports person. I started out young doing student body government in high school. I was their student body vice president. Went on to Portland State. I ended up being on the student body government here. I was one of the senators for it only, but that was right before I started doing the campaigning in 2020. Later on, I ended up interning for U.S. Senator Merkley, and I interned him for a few months. That was right about that January 6th point is when I started. It was early January. I think it was just a few days in, and
Wow.
it was it was a little bit of a shock. It's like all these people that I've just met, and for that experience, I wasn't actually at the Capitol, right? Like we were in
Mhm.
the middle of COVID, and so everything was done over Zoom. We didn't meet in person. Uh, so I didn't have to experience that myself, but I knew people that had,
Mhm.
and so it was strange. It was quite.
Mhm. But there were the impeachment hearings and then the trial, and how involved were the interns with that, like briefing Merkley or helping Merkley? Yeah.
So the interns, that wasn't quite my realm of the impeachment hearings. For me, for example, I got put in committees that worked on very particular issues, and we might get, a bill and summarize it and like brief it and do the best we could with that. But those things in particular, I was not in the mix of, but we did talk about it, we had
I can imagine,
conversations.
yeah. It was a very tense couple months, I would imagine. But yes, you'd have to like the other business of government needs to be taken care of as well. Um, going back to your first run for the state house, there's often debate about how much effort Democrats should put into quote unquote red areas and so forth. But kind of what you were saying earlier, without any presence, if Democrats don't even try, it would seem as if you wind up, then there's no dialogue at all. It's just
Exactly.
Republicans talking to themselves. And then, of course, you wind up with arguably more radical candidates because there's just a competition between other Republicans for the primary, and then knowing that they're pretty much going to run in a general uncontested. So then it's just sort of, as how extreme can you get? It just winds up being. So it's sort of important to have folks
100%.
even trying, even if they obviously you're not, the chances of winning, of course, going to be very rare. Also, having more Democrats who have your background, who's lived in these areas. I mean, often the criticism has been that a lot of um, a lot of Democrats are either from cities or from suburbs or have never kind of don't have that rural experience. At least a lot of elected Democrats. Do you see that as a value add that you can bring or that distinguishes you from some other folks running?
Oh, I think it's a huge value, and it goes into like living in that community my entire life. I understand the way that, conservatives think a lot better than I think other people do. And we get in this issue where you've got a candidate. This is polarizing. Like, I don't want to say his name, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Mhm.
And he manages to get people in this thinking of cognitive dissonance and that, oh, the left is so terrible and things like that. And if we can go in those communities and like interact with those folks and bring humanity back to where we're just having conversations with folks and not, tearing everybody down because of who they voted for and whatnot, then we can start to de-radicalize folks. Like the more we push
Mhm.
them away, the more that the more they're gonna just have to get backed in that corner. They have nowhere to go to but that corner of the most extreme. And just being in Pendleton, like growing up with folks, like I said, I love a lot of those folks. And so it's a difficult thing, but I think it's needed to be able to try to build bridges between people instead of dividing folks. And it's not that that's what everybody's trying to do, but I think it ends up just being the end result in the way that politics is currently working.
And so learning about the new district, so Oregon's third most of Multnomah County, obviously Portland, it's huge. I think
Mhm.
the average size of the Oregon districts about 7 800,000, close to 800,000 people, more so than some states like Wyoming or whatever. So it's a significant, um, you know, constituency with certain, obviously, even more so these days, sort of very specific concerns and needs. And often when we talk about national races, it's about um, national concerns and so forth, which are certainly relevant from both climate change and the economy and so forth. But is there anything specific to the district that you would that you see as a concern, um, and that you would have perhaps a unique approach to addressing if you were to be elected?
I think there's a few things. One thing that I think we're all talking about is housing and homelessness, and we haven't quite figured that out yet in this area. Like it's getting more and more. There's becoming more and more people that I see every single day, and it just seems like it's not getting fixed. But one thing that's central to my experience is that Black Lives Matter stuff, and I grew up with my father being a lawyer. So I'd hear
Mhm.
every single day of him talking about the things that were happening in the courtroom, and not specifics, but things that were happening and things that seemed unfair, unjust, and whatnot. And you have issues where I don't know if most people know this, but it's not a hard thing to like go look up, but we have more people incarcerated in this country than any nation in the history of the world.
Mhm.
There's never been a nation, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's whoever, like you could name the nation, and we break the records for all of that. And I think, how could you live in a country that we call the land of the free when we have the most people that aren't free of any country in the history of the world? So, like Martin Luther King said, is we got to be true to what we say on paper, and we're just not. We don't
Mhm.
practice what we preach. And that background of organizing with the Black Lives Matter, and then I've come to meet a lot of people that actually organize. They have the energy, the young folks, and they make rallies and they're out protesting. And those are a lot of the people that I spend my time with. Like I don't spend my time with, generally speaking, like big donors or anything like that. Like I know a lot of my opponents do. And there's a place for it, but I think the big thing is if you're on the ground with the folks that actually care about these issues and they're willing to go out of their way to organize and protest, and march in the streets. Those are the people that you want to be with if you're representing like the actual folks, constituents.
Mhm.
And we have more of that in Congress than we used to, but it's not the majority. A lot of the majority is a lot of wealthy folks, people that are they've kind of been doing this their entire lives. Even the president, he's been there. And no hate on Biden in particular. I'm not here to tear him down anyway, but uh he's been there a long time, and I think it's time for people to pass the torch to people that are actively doing these things and talking about these things.
Yeah, so I guess the argument that comes that with sort of there's so much experience that comes from understanding, how legislation is made, and arguably, unfortunately, to your point, I guess the unfortunate counter argument is that Republicans have been this current Congress has been actively showing what happens if you aren't interested in governance. So, but perhaps the answer is that they aren't interested, and that experience wouldn't help. But it seems like people, ranging from Lauren Boebert to Matt Getz and others, are completely uninterested in governing. They don't want to do the hard work, or this is something I'd written about for Wanket last week. It's today as we're recording this, but last week when this goes up. But was how Speaker Mike Johnson is potentially going to get ousted again because he tried to make a deal with Democrats, even though Republicans have such a narrow majority. Like you're going to have, like, you can't through brute force get everything you want. Um, and I think, not to sort of whataboutism here, but there is a concern that both sides, there's a sense of certain folks can believe that if you are strong enough or through either brute strength or will, that you can have your way, that that things can be done without any sort of compromise. And that's just not how our system of government exists or works, if it works well. I don't want to put you on a spot of saying, are you willing to compromise with Republicans, but more of a sense of like, I would imagine you would go in saying, if you want to solve any issues, you're willing to work with anyone in good faith who would help um, solve the problems facing you, regardless of.
Oh, certainly. I would say, and this is something I've been, saying lately, uh, is it's not so much compromise, but it's about compassion
Mhm.
and being willing to see other people as human, to work with those folks. It's not that we're gonna lesser down our fight so much for the things that we want, but we've got to bring compassion to the table and be willing to actually work with other folks and willing to have them as part of trying to create change and doing certain things. That's so it begs a question, because you have back in the day when Obama was making the Affordable Care Act, he worked with Republicans, to a point where it could have been so much more. And it was a great thing that came out. It was a great thing that came out. Was like a landmark. There's never been anything like it. But it could have been so much more if the Republicans didn't quite have the say to change a whole bunch of things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it does. It begs the question. And I think there's a point where there might be times and places for it, right?
Mhm.
So if you can get the central thing done of what you're trying to do, then there might be a time for that. But at the same time, is when there's big issues like healthcare and trying to fix the criminal justice system and making sure that we don't have so much of our black population, especially in prison.
No, yeah, yeah.
Like, you can't compromise on that. Sorry,
When,
sorry to cut you
no,
off.
no, no. With the Affordable Care Act, I think the challenge there, I think historically, was that not all of the Democratic caucus itself was that liberal. I mean, we had 60 senators briefly, but they weren't all Ted Kennedy. They were, a lot of them were um from, I mean, we had senators from Louisiana. Things have changed a great deal in 15 years or so, but there were a few from the Montanas, and they were certainly from a different perspective than some of the more liberal senators. And then we had folks who, so that just winds up being the, in a certain way, perhaps a an example of the best you could do with the coalition you have, because you have this, the more people you have, the broader the tent. Things are going to um to be some compromise on, though. I certainly, to your point, there was a sense of trying to gain alignment with Republicans who at the start had said, we're like, even if we said yesterday that we would support something that looks like this, we won't support it just because we don't want you to have a victory. So there were some bad actors there that's not even worth engaging with. And I guess that's the challenge, right? So um, with Republicans in the House now, there is a concern that they aren't even interested in hearing what you have to say. They just know that I can't go on Fox News and said I worked with Nolan Bylenga on anything, even if it was like free puppies, right? So it has to be, which is different from being like, oh, we actually happen to agree on something. Let's get this done. If you were to work with, which used to be back in the day when all of us were much younger, as I recall, especially in Oregon, you might have someone from a representative from rural Oregon working with a representative from rural South Carolina or some of the city, like whatever's a common interest. And now it is much less likely that we're seeing that. And that's sort of the challenge. You know, but that begs, as you said, begs the question, how much are you willing to play politics to that degree? I mean, I am not, of course, a Fox News host, but like having to go on certainly just sort of like spin things in a way or go on the attack or to deal with the fact that there is sort of negative information streams going to people. Like how do you counter that when people, like, say in Pendleton, if they're only watching Fox News, how do you reach them? And this is a question I think that someone young, the next generation of young people can really resolve because they are not from the generation of everyone's watching Walter Cronkite, right? And everyone's
Mhm.
watching Meet the Press and agree on that shared reality. And if I go on Meet the Press and communicate clearly what I stand for, that message will get out to my constituents, whoever they might be on the political spectrum. But now it is much more siloed. So, what do you think? Like, what are some possible solutions that the next generation might have for communication?
Yeah, no, I think it is a tough thing to try to bring people together. But I do want to give like an example of this is when we were doing our Black Lives Matter thing in Pendleton, because it is possible. It's possible. We had, and I guess I got to go in a little more detail on this, right? We had our folks on one side of like a park, across the street at the start of our event. And we had some statements and people, talking beforehand and things like that. Then on the other side of the street, there were a bunch of counter protesters and people that had, Confederate flags, back to blue flags. They had militia flags. The 3%ers showed up. And before this, I actually uh, called personally, the head of the Umatilla County 3%ers to try and uh, I didn't know quite to what expect, but I'm always willing to reach out to people. I'm not gonna just throw people under the rug and be like, no, you're not worth it, my time, kind of a thing. Like I'm not like that. I wanted to take the time to reach out to the head of the 3%ers and see how we could, come to at least a common ends on this thing. And that person, gave me their word that they would not have the 3%ers like sponsoring any kind of event that was a counter protest. And perhaps she stuck to her word. I don't know, but they ended up having 3%ers there with the 3%er flags, and so there was this perception that they came and that they were against us. And I tried to build and connect the bridge, but by the end of it, uh, is a strange thing because we ended up having some of those counter protesters cross the road and talk to our protesters, and they were shaking hands with folks. I think there was a hug. There was a picture that was in the local newspaper of like they came across and were learning about Black Lives Matter and what we were doing. I think it's because we came across as with dignity and respect, and that we were really trying to do things to bring folks together. And I think that sentiment is important. It can't just be like this political game. It's got to really be that we're getting down to the humanity level. And, like I believe in, loving all people, and I think that is a message that can be found in the right wing as well. When you look at Christianity, like I grew up in the church. And so it's a thing that, I care about a lot. And the central message of Jesus in Christianity is to love one another. And so if we can use that as a bridge to get people to come together, then anything's possible. And that's the way that I look at it. I know there's going to be a lot of people that they're going to be looking at trying to play this political game. What can I say on Fox News, or what can I say on CNN, or can I go on this interview or that or whatnot? I'm not interested in trying to play that game. I'm interested in trying to bring people together and getting those folks to come together and get the job done.
Thank you. And I know, obviously, not that you have to say it, but it's something that folks say that you're attempting to reach everyone. But often campaigns have certain strategies of looking at the other your competitors and sort of, here's how I could win this primary. Is there sort of groups, or I mean, obviously your youth and but others, but like, where do you see again the of the an issue or that's not being addressed, or a community that's being underserved that you feel that can help you stand out from certainly someone who's going to some of these candidates who have significantly more name recognition than you?
Oh, I'll be honest. Like I'm a very optimistic person, which is why I wouldn't even be running if I didn't think that we could win, right? And the people that are currently, volunteering and working on my campaign, they wouldn't be helping out if they didn't think we could. Because it does feel a little bit, when we hopped in, like a David and Goliath kind of thing. It's like, wow, we're going against these big names. They got a lot of money. They have they got everything they could ask for. The DPO is in their back pocket in a way, right?
Mhm.
I'm not like some big name in the Democratic Party, but at the same time, is they've all got things that are in their not even like past history, in their immediate history, to where they're getting called out for it in the local news. Like people are
Mhm.
reporting on it, like I don't got to go out of my way to talk about it. Like it's being
Mhm.
talked about. And our demographic and the people that I think that we reach and the people that, that I connect with the best, because I'm one of those folks, are people like students,
Mhm.
people that are actually organizers and that make protests and demonstrations and that advocate for those things. And I'm kind of going back to what I was saying earlier on that, but that's what I really feel is we reach people the most, is the folks that are unsatisfied with having another millionaire go to Congress and get rich while they're in Congress. Because it's a thing. And I have a feeling that there's certain people that are elected that looks like that's the trend of what happens with those folks. And so I think that's our strong suit, is not that we're going to have all the flashy cars, in a sense of like the flashy things, right? We're not going to have the big name anything by any means, but we're going to be the people that are on the street, that are talking to folks and communicating with them, and actually trying to get down to like, what can we do to fix this issue? How can we not just exploit the position,
Mhm.
and here's the thing, people nowadays, it feels like they're bought out by corporations. And I'm going to say it feels like, because there's some people that aren't, there are some people that are, it's a thing, it's a thing. But
Well, I mean, yeah, no, you certainly can sort of, I guess, empathize with that feeling that a lot of students or young people have, and there's concerns about that sort of perhaps lack of morale from classic Democratic voters who are young, and sort of inspiring them to get out to vote will be specifically important in this coming election. And I guess going to the schools, going to the universities, and convincing people that their vote matters. I do think the belief that, you know, because I've been knocking around in this for a few decades, is sort of, it feels as if people say everyone's corrupt and bought off, and then vote for me and I will be different, and then they have to explain in 2 years why they're not, why they got bought off, and people feel it's sort of cynicism circle, right? And
there's a lot
so,
of,
you know, uh,
exactly. I do. You brought me to another thing that I thought of, though, is when it comes to, campaigning, is we have been the people that haven't been talked about by the news outlets. I don't know quite why that is, but we have a lot of folks that are kind of just underneath, like on Twitter, whether on Facebook, whether they're, that we, DMing folks, giving phone calls to folks, and everybody we talk to is, they want to help out and get on board. And so we've even got, a cohort of graduate students that are on board with this stuff and trying to make it happen. you know it's it's wild, because I started my master's degree not quite thinking, hey, let's go run for, Congress. There's not really a good place to do it. You need an opportunity, and Earl Blumenauer gave the opportunity by retiring, and now it's a matter of getting all the folks on the ground that want to see somebody that, my net worth, I'm not afraid to say it, but I don't have money. I'll tell you that. I'm essentially somebody who's broke, and I intend to remain that way. The way I think of it is, I get into Congress, anything that I'm not spending, it's not going to make him more money. I'll tell you that. It's either going to pay the bills that I need, or it's going to good causes. And I that's the way that I look at the future. And I'm going to put people around me, like my campaign manager. He's not anti-DPO by any means, but there are people that I think he doesn't want to work with in particular because of the way that they do things. And so
the Democratic Party of Oregon, for those things, you mean?
The Democratic Party of Oregon. And it's not, I'm not throwing shade at the Democratic Party in that regards, but there's always people, whether you're left or right, whether you're, up or down, there's always somebody that's difficult to work with.
Yeah. And obviously not suggesting it's a monolith or like a machine, but there's a certain machine nature to a political party, in a sense of you can pick up you can be connected to other people who can help you, from raising money or to connecting to for endorsements, and so forth. And that is, if you're outside that system, it is tough, unless you have different strategies. It seems like you're kind of taking the I wouldn't say activist approach, but more in the sense of reaching people on individual levels. I suppose trying to get small donor funds rather than corporate funds to remain competitive. Since you launched, like how, and as you said, you're optimistic, but just how do you think you've been doing based on what your original plan had been when you launched your campaign? Or is it going according to plan or better than you expected? Like, how would you describe the past few weeks or months?
Well, like I said, I'm a very optimistic person. I love the message. Obama always talked about hope and faith and all those things. I have to say that it's going better than I thought it would go. Right. And you don't see it from the news articles. They don't report on us at all, but we're reaching out to a lot of folks. We're getting a lot of help, and it's kind of like this unseen, I don't know, it's like an unseen projectile that I don't think people see it coming, but particularly, I don't think that the people in the DPO see our campaign coming that much. There's people that are catching on a DPO, but like you said, is we're really focused on people that are on the ground doing things. There's a lot of people that actively participate in the political process, from like protesting and organizing and creating events and things like that. And it's quite a thing. It's quite a thing. But to answer your question, I think it's going a lot better than expected. And not that we expected it to be bad. It's just every day I've got like a new high of wow, like that happened. Wow, this happens. Like, that's incredible. Like, people are doing good work.
So specific examples of things that have surprised you so far, like just either that you would be willing to share? Because I find it fascinating when people launch things and it's like, oh, that moment where, oh, wow, this is actually going better than I'd imagined.
Oh yeah, no, I've had the day that for example, the day that I launched my campaign, I had he's the founder of the League of Minority Voters, commented, like, saw the video from day one, and we're putting it out. We don't have a whole bunch of money to like put out like a thing or whatever, but people were just sharing these videos, and at this point it's probably got 10,000 views or something like that over all the platforms, which you can't say that that's an insane amount, on a metric where somebody could just put out a whole bunch of money and make something happen. But you're saying day one we put out a launch video, and we're already getting these different groups and organizations that are DMing me and messaging me and saying, no, like, we want to help you out in any way that we can. And not, like nonprofits, they can't endorse or do anything in particular, so but like people that are part of those nonprofits, being like, no, like I want to go on my way to help you out. You know, we got endorsements and such like that are a lot of local folks.
Mhm.
It's and then we're just getting invited, like even you know, inviting us onto the podcast to have a conversation. I I love that. It's great to be here. And
No,
so
thank you.
every single day is something new.
That's well, yeah, that's it's really exciting. Just this moment, I mean, whenever someone who served such a long time as the previous representative, when they retire and this opening comes up, there's a sense of, you know, opportunity and great change. So it's sort of interesting to see how this will develop and play out. And you know, I will talk to anyone who's running. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. And but you know, whoever it winds up being, you know, Portland definitely, and the whole area. I don't want to say that this district is just Portland, but obviously Portland is speaking heavily for certain issues. It seems like we are getting a lot of I remember when I lived in New York, like 20 years so years ago, it Portland was spoken of in a different way than it's being now, which is unfortunate. Some of it unfairly being smeared during 2020, and then with the issues with crime or houselessness. And I think that people want a sense of, as you were saying, the Obama hope that these issues can be resolved, right? Like the stuff that's real. Like the city was never on fire, so I don't have a need for that to be resolved because it never there wasn't like protesters burning down buildings or whatever. But um the city does have, you know, challenges that I think we need as much help as we can get. And so I'm glad to speak to anyone who's seriously interested in going to Congress to try to help resolve those things.
See, we need stuff like that where, you know, folks that are willing to talk to anybody, you know, and that's a big thing. And I also want to emphasize, because our campaign, like I said, we were started as students, and there's local folks, other people have come on and have started helping, and you know, it's a campaign that's growing significantly. But from me just being a student with a bunch of other students starting out, like anybody can do this. And I think that there's this perception that, and it's tough, don't get me wrong, like it takes a lot of work, it's tough to do, but there's this perception that you have to be somebody that's either got a lot of money, you've got to be somebody that's been in some prominent, you know, position for a long period of time or something like that, or you've got to go get these big name endorsements to run a campaign. And I think it's otherwise. I think that if you put in the work and the effort and you go and talk to anybody, you know, you go and organize and you go make a plan and, you know, just go through the realm of how do I do this and how do I figure out how to set up a campaign and organize and make an organization, right? Anybody can do it. And so we need more people that I think are willing to just get in to the ring, to get on the ballot and to say, I'm going to make a change. Because how can you make change? How can you expect other people to make change? Like, we've got to be the ones to make it. You know, if you see that something can be done, then you see that you want something to be done, you've got to go do it yourself. You know, you can't expect other folks to do it because it just never happens. Even, and this might be somewhat because of the Republican Party, but we just had the least productive Congress since the Great Depression, you know, we have right
Mhm.
now. And that means that there's not a lot that's getting done. But this is a time in history where people are protesting and demonstrating at like unprecedented levels. You know, public opinion and perception of folks that are in Congress and folks that are in the government, like people are losing trust for the government. You know, the left wing is losing trust for government. The right wing is losing trust for government, and there's a reason for why that is. Like that's because they're not doing the things that people ask for. I'd have to go find this particular article again, but I remember that there was an article I looked at. It was a while back, but it showed that the widespread majority of things that are overwhelmingly supported by the public never get passed. The things that are overwhelmingly supported by the public never get passed. The things that are overwhelmingly supported by billionaires and corporations, they always get passed. So there is this difference of our votes. Do they actually, this idea, or do our votes matter? In a sense, does anything actually happen from us participating by voting in the democratic process, or are we just the
Mhm.
corporations choosing political candidates for us, right? Like,
Oh
in a
yeah.
sense, I don't. There is
Well, the
a little bit of that.
corporations and Republicans sort of benefit from people believing their votes don't matter. And it's sort of the
Mhm.
vicious circle, because if people become demoralized and don't vote, particularly young people, then they can't affect change. Because obviously, what happens is politicians, the saying goes, and you will not be like this, I'm sure, but the saying goes, politicians, once elected, their concern is raising enough money to run again and maintaining the coalition that got them elected. You sort of dance to people who brought you. And if people drop out or feel disaffected, they don't participate, they don't quote unquote count, because then the person's trying to get reelected. It's just like, this group that endorsed me, I need to get there, I need to maintain their support and then maintain the active participation of these people. And I think the only way to change that sense that corporations and billionaires, as they say, have any sort of outsized influence is that more people vote in line with what they are showing. We've been seeing some of that, right, across the country, where even in some of the most conservative states, um, referendums, you go straight to the people and ask them to support abortion rights, for instance, they've been overwhelmingly supporting it, even in very like from Kansas to Ohio. Those ballot measures have passed, protecting abortion rights. So I think, um, generally, I think the idea is that if we, as you were saying, remain optimistic, and like the message is like, stick it out, your vote will matter, as long as politicians believe that you will continue voting for them, or that you will be part of that political process going forward.
No, exactly. I think that that's a big thing of what our campaign's about. And there's a lot of issues that a lot of Democrats agree on. But a big central thing is, like, anybody could do this. That democracy does matter. That democracy is still alive. That we could hop in the ring and your vote can count to vote in somebody new, and that's a thing. And it's wild to me. The whole thing is wild to me. I'll be honest. There's days when I look at politics and I think to myself, why would I ever want to have anything to do with that? Right. And there's days when I also think, like, no, like I really believe that we can make a difference. And so I start looking at ways of, how can we better communicate with, at the time when we get in office, we'll have constituents and such. How can we better communicate with people? Maybe we go about with our voting by polls with constituents or something. I don't know exactly what that would be, but those are things that have kind of been on my mind, is how do we give better representation to the people that are actually voting, right? And I'm going to come up with something along those lines when we get there, but it'll be a good time.
Mhm. Well, Nolan, thank you so much for your time, for speaking with us today. And where can folks reach you, both local folks and national folks, if they're interested in supporting you?
Certainly, I've got on all my social media platforms, other than YouTube. If you go to Bylenga 2024, so at Bylenga 2024, you can reach me on any social media platform. And then on YouTube, it's just Nolan Bylenga. So, my name, no spaces in there. And my website is www.bylenga.com. And so that's where we got all of our content we're putting out, and we're updating it pretty well. We are a bunch of normal folks, you know, like I don't have somebody making these videos that I put out for me. Like I'm making them myself, you know. So it's a lot of work, but yeah, if you follow us, you'll see the next things we put out, and it'll be a good time.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Nolan. Good luck, and we'll see you out there. Take care.
Certainly. Thank you for having me on.